In the waning light of a blood-orange sunset, Yiska stood silent atop a rugged ridge, eyes narrowing against the jagged horizon. Known among his people as a warrior unmatched in battle, his hands bore the scars of countless clashes. But it was not the roar of gunfire or the sting of arrows that haunted him tonight. It was a terror more profound, the unyielding purity, an idea so absolute it chilled his spirit deeper than any war wound ever could. The arid wind swept through the desolate landscape of the Old West, where survival was carved from brutality and fleeting alliances. Here, amid dry mesas and thorned brush, Yiska's solitary path wound between the echoes of ceaseless conflict and the stillness of his own restless soul. The frontier was no stranger to bloodshed, but few knew of the battle he waged within, a relentless war between the hardened warrior and the fragile hope clinging to the edges of his being. His days unfolded in somber rhythm, escorting weary traders, tracking hostile parties, and navigating the razor-thin margins between life and death. Yet beneath the stoic veneer, a restless disquiet gnawed at him, a dread of the unblemished, a yearning for the untarnished that twisted like a shadow over his heart. That very evening, as Yiska guided a small caravan through a narrow canyon, the fragile balance of his world was shattered. From the curling dust emerged a figure unlike any he had seen. Nayeli, a young woman draped in a cloak as white as freshly fallen snow, her gaze steady yet distant, approached with measured steps. In her hands, she cradled an ancient emblem, radiant and immaculate, with symbols etched in silence, untouched by war or time. The clean lines of the symbol struck a chord deep within Yiska, an unsettling resonance that stirred forgotten memories and whispered of a past he had buried beneath layers of soot and sorrow. Yiska's pulse quickened, his gaze flickering between the emblem and the woman. Questions tangled in the webs of his mind. Who was she? What realm did this pure token hail from? The purity of the symbol clashed violently with the raw savagery he had come to know, a haunting contrast that fractured his defenses. The caravan slowed under the weight of this unexpected encounter, the trader's eyes wide with silent apprehension. Yiska's fingers brushed a hidden knife, instinct sharpening, yet his thoughts swirled in a tempest of doubt and fear. The symbol seemed to glow in the fading light, casting shadows that danced like ghosts along the canyon walls. With each heartbeat, his isolation deepened, wrapped tighter in the cold grip of unease. The silence between Yiska and Nayeli was thick, heavy with unspoken truths and fragile mistrust. He caught himself resisting the impulse to recoil, battling against the phantom his culture warned him of, the dread of purity as unyielding and unforgiving as the desert's scorching sun. This was more than fear. It was a specter of a world where absolutes reigned, where the gray shades of survival gave way to ruthless perfection. Then, as the wind stilled, Yiska's vision blurred, and in the depths of his mind emerged a spectral apparition. The pure emblem expanding to engulf his memories, stirring old pains and forgotten faces. A voice, faint but relentless, echoed, challenging all he believed. The warrior who had mastered the battlefield now faced a war within, one not of flesh and blood, but of spirit and shadow. He clenched his jaw, the weight of the moment pressing down with unbearable force. Nayeli's eyes bore into his, steady and unyielding, as if she held the key to either his salvation or his ruin. The dawn of an uncertain journey crept over the horizon, promising that the saga of the warrior who feared purity was only beginning. Muitos companheiros de jornada que acompanham nossas lendas por estas terras esquecidas nos contaram que o destino ou o algoritmo traiçoeiro do YouTube às vezes desfaz suas inscrições sem aviso, antes que a próxima trilha perigosa se revele e uma nova reviravolta aconteça. Dê uma espiada rápida aí embaixo do vídeo e garanta que você ainda está inscrito em nosso bando, para não perder o fio da meada. Não queremos que você perca nenhuma das vozes que ecoam deste vale. Verifique sua inscrição agora e junte-se à nossa saga. The night settled over the camp, heavy with the scent of burning sage and the murmurs of cautious voices. Nayeli moved among the firelight with quiet purpose, her cloak a pale beacon against the shadows, the emblem she carried tucked safely near her heart. Around her, the tribe gathered, the flickering flames casting deep lines on weathered faces, some filled with curiosity, others shadowed by suspicion. The tales she told were unlike any they had heard, whispers of a peace that was more than mere absence of war, ideals of purity of heart and spirit that could heal the fractured land. Yiska listened from his place near the darkened edge of the circle, a storm churning beneath his composed exterior. Her words awakened an unease within him, stirring something ancient and unyielding. The purity she spoke of, it was no stranger to him, yet it gnawed with a fierce intensity, a terror that cut deeper than the sharpest blade. It was as if the very essence of his brutal world was threatened by this uncompromising light, this call to something unblemished and whole. His hands twitched, recalling every scar, every life taken, each mark a testament to survival, but also to surrender to the unforgiving wilderness of war. Nayeli's vision challenged the truth he had clung to for so long, that only through strength and bloodshed could one endure. Whispers spread uneasily as some of the warriors exchanged glances, their eyes flickering between Yiska and Nayeli. The tribe stood at a crossroads, caught between the grim reality of their past and a promise that seemed fragile, almost impossible. Trust was scarce on these lands, especially when survival demanded vigilance against every unknown shadow. Yet Nayeli radiated a calm conviction, as if the purity she embodied was a shield in itself, a power not of force, but of transformation. Then, the sudden rush of movement shattered the fragile peace. Rough voices, fierce and unrelenting, tore through the night air, the war cries of a rival band closing in, bloodied and hungry for conquest. Their ferocity was a bitter reminder that the land tolerated no hesitation. Yiska's instincts snapped to the forefront, his body tensed, muscles coiling like a drawn bow. Still, an unfamiliar knot twisted inside, a hesitation as cold as the desert night. These enemies bore a different purpose, muttering mantras of purity, as if it were armor as real as any leather or chainmail. In the clash of bodies and steel, that terror surfaced like a phantom. Yiska's hand faltered at the critical moment, blade poised but unwilling to strike true against a foe who, despite the blood and dust carried the same unsettling conviction in their eyes. The enemy's words echoed in his mind. "The purity of spirit defends us all." The phrase wound through his thoughts, a cruel reminder of his deepest dread. Could purity be a weapon? Or was it a truth he had long refused to face? The battle raged with brutal intensity, cries of pain and defiance mingling with the clatter of weapons. Yiska fought fiercely, yet the hesitation lingered, a crack in his armor that unsettled those who fought beside him. When the dust finally settled, the echoes of war still humming in the air, he found himself staring at the fallen enemy, mind clouded and heart pounding with conflicted fury. The idealism that man espoused mocked the bitter realities tattooed into Yiska's soul. Retreating from the front lines, Yiska sought solitude beneath the skeletal branches of a gnarled mesquite tree. The desert wind whispered through the leaves, carrying with it memories he sought desperately to bury. Faces of lost kin, the screams swallowed by the night, the broken trust of a world where purity seemed both a luxury and a curse. Nayeli's presence lingered in his thoughts, her calm defiance a stark contrast to the chaos inside him. When she approached, her voice gently breaking the heavy silence, Yiska turned sharply. She spoke not as an adversary, but as a mirror, reflecting possibilities he had never dared to consider. "Purity is not your enemy," she said softly. "It is the seed from which healing grows." But the words fell on dry soil. He recoiled, his gaze hard as flint, struggling to close the chasm forming between them, between the warrior who embraced survival's cruelty and the woman who carried hope wrapped in white. "You speak of ideals," he said, voice rough, "but this world is not kind to ideals. Pure hearts are broken here." His confession hung in the smoky air, a fragile truth laid bare. Nayeli's eyes did not waver. Instead, they deepened with understanding, striking at the fortress around his fear. That night, sleep evaded Yiska. In the flickering shadows of the firelight, his mind was invaded by visions, ghostly images of the pure emblem growing larger, engulfing faces and memories he had sealed away. A distant voice whispered questions that stirred his soul with relentless force. Was he to remain the warrior who feared purity, or could he become something more? The burden of his past pressed hard, but so did the flicker of possibility. His body ached, but it was the war within that threatened to undo him. The line between protector and prisoner blurred, and Yiska knew answers would come only if he dared to follow the call. As dawn broke, washing the canyon in pale gold, Yiska rose from the earth with a resolve forged anew. Nayeli stood waiting, the symbol in her hand gleaming with promise and peril. Together, they would face what lay ahead, an uncertain journey that held the fate of a tribe and the soul of a warrior in the balance. The rattling sound of distant horse hooves interrupted the fragile calm. Shadows shifted beyond the ridge. The rival band had returned, fierce and unyielding, their numbers swelling under the morning sun. Yiska's eyes narrowed. His heart pounded with a troubling certainty. The next clash would not just be for survival. It would test the deepest corners of his fear and the fragile hope that now stirred within. He tightened his grip on his weapon, the weight of choice heavier than ever, as the enemy closed in, and the battle for the purity of spirit and the survival of their way was about to begin. The desert night pressed heavy as Yiska sat beneath the skeletal mesquite, his breath shallow and uneven. The distant thunder of hooves grew closer, a grim reminder that the rival band was returning, swelling in numbers and cruelty under the rising sun. The emblem in Nayeli's hand caught the faint moonlight, pure, untouched. Yet in Yiska's heart, it stirred a tempest fiercer than any storm outside. His fingers flexed, tightening around the hilt of his knife. The hesitation that had forced him to falter in battle now gnawed relentlessly at his soul. Purity, once a distant phantom, now haunted every thought. He felt as if the very core of his being stood, crucible, on the edge of a blade. Nayeli approached, her steps soft but unyielding. "Yiska," she said, voice low but unwavering, "there is a strength in purity you do not yet see. It is not the iron and blood of war, but it can carve a path through the darkness." He looked up, eyes shadowed by doubt. "I have lived among death and fire," he said quietly. "And yet this purity feels colder, more merciless. It demands a sacrifice I am not sure I can give." Her gaze locked with his, calm and resolute. "It demands honesty, to face what we hide from ourselves. That is the true test." A wind stirred the dry leaves, whispering secrets of the land as moments stretched between them. The tribe, restless and wary, listened beyond the veil of nightfall. Nayeli's presence was a beacon and a warning, an invitation to change shadowed by uncertainty. The moon dipped behind the jagged horizon when the first scouts came crashing through the brush, their voices hoarse, war paint smeared, eyes burning with fanatic zeal. The rival bands surged forward, wild as the desert wind, bearing weapons sharpened on old grudges. Their leader, a towering man with a scar slicing across his cheek, shouted with grim fervor, "The time for weakness is over. Purity feeds only the dead." Yiska rose from the earth, muscles taut as a drawn bow. His warriors gathered quickly, the crackling tension thick as gunpowder. Nayeli stood steady beside him, emblem clasped close, a symbol not just of hope, but of defiance. The battle ignited with savage cries and the clang of steel. Yiska moved through the fray like a force born of years hardened by war. Yet each clash of blades and volley of arrows was underscored by a disquiet deeper than the fight itself. The chanting enemy pressed on, words of purity twisted into weapons sharper than any arrowhead. At a critical moment, Yiska faced the scarred leader amid the chaos. Their eyes met, and the man spat, "Abandon your illusions, warrior. Only the brutal survive. Your purity will be your undoing." Yiska's heart thudded against his ribs as memories of past battles surged like flames. Blood spilled, kin lost, honor ravaged. But in that pulse, a fragile ember stirred. The purity Nayeli embodied was not a weakness, but a weapon unseen. He struck, not just with blade, but with newfound conviction. The rival faltered, cries fading into the dust. Around him, the tide of battle shifted, warriors rallying beneath a cause that transcended mere survival. Hours later, when the dust settled and the fading sun painted the sky in bruised hues. The tribe gathered amid the ruin and silence. Yiska's eyes sought Nayeli's, finding in her presence a calm that had once seemed impossible. She drew nearer and spoke, her voice trembling but steady. "There is a secret I must share, one that will change everything. Purity is not without its cost." Yiska's breath caught. The weight of his fears pressed down anew, yet he refused to look away. "Tell me," he demanded, voice a low growl, "because the path ahead is shrouded in doubt." Nayeli's gaze descended, momentarily lost in the emblem she still held. "To protect this purity, to truly embrace it, you will have to sacrifice much. More than battles won or lost, something of yourself." A heavy silence wrapped them. The tribe watched, breaths held, the air thick with the promise of change and the shadow of loss. Yiska's jaw tightened as the truth settled around him. The purity that frightened him, that had pulled at his soul like a relentless wind, now demanded a price he was only beginning to understand. The distant ridge flickered with movement once more, horses rearing against the horizon's flush. The rival band, battered but unbroken, regrouped beneath the dawn's first light, their war cries rising again. Yiska hefted his weapon, eyes dark with resolve. The battle was not over. It was only the beginning of a trial, deeper than any war he had ever fought, a test of spirit and sacrifice that would shape the fate of his people. As the enemy surged forward, Yiska stepped into the rising sun, ready to face what fear and purity could bring. The war for their souls was about to begin. The sun had barely risen when Yiska gathered his few reluctant warriors and Nayeli beneath towering cedars that stood like ancient sentinels guarding secrets long forgotten. The territory sacred, whispered about in old tales and held in reverence, lay ahead, an expanse both feared and revered for its spiritual potency. Its rugged passes breathed a quiet tension, promising enlightenment or ruin. Yiska's hands tightened around the worn haft of his knife, feeling the coarse leather grip bite into his palms. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the horizon, but the true threat lay buried deeper inside, his trembling heart coated with doubt. The warrior who once moved with unshakable certainty now hesitated before the unknown embodiment of purity. Nayeli's presence beside him was steady, unwavering, a silent flame cutting through the shadows of his doubt. Their small company crept along the dry, cracked soil, the weight of silence heavier than any pack carried. The shooting sun struck the dusty leaves, casting long, flickering shadows that seemed to dance between the worlds of the living and the unseen. Nayeli's emblem hung close to her chest, glinting faintly like a promise etched in light. It was both beacon and burden. As they entered the first glen, a figure emerged from the mist of dawn, a wizened old man, draped in tattered robes that had weathered more storms than any living soul. His eyes glowed with a pale fire, simultaneously weary and knowing. The sacred shaman. Time seemed to slow as Yiska's breath caught. This was the moment his restless spirit had been lured toward. though every inch of him screamed resistance. The shaman's voice, low and quivering, like the wind through sagebrush, broke the oppressive silence. You seek answers, not easily won, warrior. The path of purity is no shield against fear, but a mirror of it. To accept what I bear is to face the shadow within. Will you walk that road willingly? Yiska's gaze locked on the ancient artifact the shaman extended. A slender, carved bone pendant, unblemished and stark against the dark sinew of time. The emblem of redemption. It pulsed with quiet warmth, as if alive with untold power and unspoken cost. Nayeli stepped forward, her voice calm yet resolute. This gift holds a choice, Yiska. To wield it is to confront your terror, to accept that purity does not cleave the spirit, but heals the fractures no blade can touch. The warrior felt the weight of generations in the air, the burden of a truth he hadn't dared confront. His mind flashed to the scars of battle, the faces lost, the rage that had once defined him. Could he dare relinquish his armor of brutality for this fragile, haunting ideal? Before he could answer, a sudden uproar shattered the morning stillness. Twigs snapped sharply as rough footsteps charged through the underbrush. Soldiers from a fanatical faction, long entwined with violence and vengeance. Their faces were contorted, in frenzy, eyes wild, battle cries erupting like thunder rolling across the mesas. Among them was a ghost from Yiska's past, an old comrade turned enemy, his loyalties hardened to stone. Traitor, the man spat, brandishing a blood-soaked hatchet. You poison the land with your bleeding heart and this traitor woman. We will snuff out your weakness. A clash ignited instantly, dust rising like a shroud as the camp erupted into chaos. Yiska moved with the practiced ease born of countless battles, but now his blade was not just a weapon. It was an extension of a conflicted soul. Nayeli fought fiercely beside him, protecting the emblem as if the fate of all hung upon its preservation. The warrior's mind fractured between old instincts and new fears. His former allies pressed hard, their faces twisted with bitterness and fanatic rage. They saw his quest for purity as betrayal, a soft surrender to an enemy they despised. Their violence was relentless, a storm fueled by blood and bitter memories. Caught amid the frenzy, Yiska was isolated, seized by surprised captors. Iron cuffs bit into his wrists, the cold metal a stark contrast to the burning fire within. Bound and defeated, he was dragged deeper into the wilderness, chained not only by flesh, but by the weight of expectations and betrayals. Within the flickering shadows of captivity, Yiska's torment grew fierce. Memories clawed at him, the screams of the massacre he once survived, the shattered faces of kin, the suffocating dread of a purity that threatened to unravel everything he was. Nayeli had vanished, taken beyond reach, her fate a cruel echo in the dark. But in the coldest depths a spark flared, a crumpled figure moving with silent purpose. An old ally, once trusted and scarred by time's cruel hand, slipped into the cell, hands steady and eyes burning with unspoken resolve. "You're not finished yet," the man hissed, producing a hidden blade. "Come, we must face your fears, and reclaim what was lost. With battered limbs and a heart heavy but unbroken, Yiska rose, the promise of hope flickering like a fragile flame. The journey forward was shrouded, dangers looming like the sharp cactus spines beneath the unforgiving sun. Yet, even as dawn gave way to harsh daylight, one truth pierced his soul: to save Nayeli, to shield his tribe from the storm gathering beyond the horizon, he must confront the purity he feared, not as an enemy, but as the key to their survival. The first howl of the approaching cavalry, carried on desert winds, relentless, ferocious, and echoing with the death cry of old wounds. Yiska gripped his blade tighter, muscles coiling. The battle for body, mind, and spirit had only just begun. The crisp morning air clung to Yiska's skin as he sat beneath the stoic cedars, their ancient limbs reaching skyward like silent sentinels, guarding untold secrets. Around him, the small band of warriors shifted nervously, their eyes flickering between the towering trees and the sun-streaked horizon. Nayeli stood close, emblem resting near her heart, gleaming faintly in the filtered light, a beacon wrapped in fragile white. Yiska's hands gripped his worn knife's haft, muscles taut as the unpredictable desert winds. The territory, sacred, lay before them, a realm as spiritual as it was perilous, whispered of in faded tales told around flickering fires. Every step forward pulled tight the strings of his buried dread, the embodiment of purity, what he feared more than any blade or bullet. The passage into the glen was shadowed and still. Mists curled lazily above cracked earth, weaving between brittle sagebrush. Ahead, a figure emerged with the weight of years, etched in every fold of his tattered robes. The shaman, his eyes pale embers of time, pierced Yiska's guarded gaze and held unspoken wisdom. The path you tread is neither clear nor kind, the shaman whispered, voice low like the rustling sage in the breeze. Purity is not a shield from fear, but a reflection of it. To accept the truth I bring is to confront shadows you have long denied. Will you walk this road willingly? Yiska's breath caught, the air thick with expectation and the sting of long-suppressed uncertainty. Before him, the shaman extended a slender pendant carved from bone, pristine and stark against the ravages of time. It vibrated with quiet energy, an emblem of redemption and of a cost yet unknown. Nayeli stepped forward without hesitation, her voice steady and clear. This gift demands courage, Yiska. To wield it is to face the truths we hide, even from ourselves. Purity does not cleave the spirit. It binds its broken pieces. Memories surged unbidden, faces lost to merciless raids, the acrid scent of smoke rising from scorched earth, the weight of survival carved into his bloodied hands. Could he trade the armor forged in violence for this elusive, haunting ideal? His internal storm was abruptly shattered by the cacophony of hurrying footsteps. Rough voices cracked the morning calm, angry and sharp as flint striking stone. Out of the trees surged a group of fanatics, their battle cries echoing over the mesas like thunderclaps. Their eyes burned with zealotry, faces smeared with the grime of countless revenge-fueled raids. Among them moved a ghost from Yiska's past, once trusted, now twisted by hatred. Sweat mixed with the dark streaks of dried blood as the man spat venomous words. "Traitor! Your bleeding heart pollutes these lands. We will crush this weakness you festoon like a banner." Chaos ignited like dry tinder. Dust vanished into the swarming frenzy as steel clashed relentlessly. Yiska's blade moved with lethal precision, his motions a somber dance born from decades of bloodshed. Yet his fury was shadowed by uncertainty, the burden of conflicting truths warring within. Nayeli fought fiercely beside him, her steps deliberate, guardianship fierce over the emblem that seemed to pulse with fragile finality. His former comrades pressed in savagely, their faces twisted with bitter scorn, each strike fueled by turbulent memories and a fanatic devotion to brutal survival. To them, Yiska's quest for purity was betrayal, a soft surrender, anathema to their hardened souls. Suddenly, caught in a violent upheaval, Yiska found cold iron biting into his wrists. Shackled and defeated, he was dragged through thorned brush and over jagged stone, chains clanking, a heavy reminder of the expectations shattered and the trust curtailed. His body ached, but the torment was deeper still, gnawing at the fragile core of his being. Within the shadows of his grim captivity, the weight of a war unseen pressed down. Visions surfaced, spectral memories of massacre and loss, of faces frozen in agony beneath the cruel sun. The purity he dreaded seemed a phantom torment, promise and peril intertwined. Nayeli was gone, taken far beyond his grasp, her fate a hollow ache in the dark. Then, in the shrouded silence, a figure emerged, a faded silhouette known from days past. Scars marred his face, but his eyes shone with a fierce, undying flame. Without a word, he produced a glinting blade from hidden folds and whispered, "You are far from finished. Come, warrior, face your fear and reclaim what was lost." Gathering the shards of his battered spirit, Yiska pushed himself upright. Every movement was heavy with pain, every breath a hushed prayer mingled with steely resolve. The path ahead was veiled in uncertainty, sharp with the thorns of danger, yet stronger now was the ember of hope, flickering stubborn against the gathering night. Above, the distant howl of approaching hooves tore through the wilderness, a relentless drumbeat carrying the promise of reckoning. The fanatics' cavalry hastened, their numbers swollen and rage unspent. Yiska's grip tightened around the hilt, muscles coiling like a captured snake, every sense sharpened by the looming battle. The war was no longer just for survival. It was a war for spirit, for the fragile flame of purity that could redefine everything. And at its heart stood Yiska, the haunted warrior, ready to face the storm that would decide the future of his tribe and the truth of his soul. As the shadows shifted on the dusty ridge, the relentless cavalcade charged forward under the bruised dawn. The true trial was about to begin. The cold dawn crept slowly over the rugged land as Yiska gathered his small band beneath the towering cedars. Thick trunks rose like ancient sentinels, their shadowed limbs stretching into the waking sky. silent witnesses to promises whispered long ago between the earth and the spirit. Around him, the warriors exchanged uneasy glances. The territory sacred lay ahead, a place veiled in mystery, where answers were said to come only to those brave enough to confront their deeper selves. Yiska's fingers clenched hard around the worn haft of his knife, knuckles paling against the coarse leather. He had walked many battlefields, faced enemies with steel and fury, yet what awaited now stirred a far darker tempest than war itself, the spectral challenge of purity. Nayeli stood close, the emblem against her chest, shimmering faintly in the pale morning light, a fragile beacon promising redemption and peril in equal measure. The earth beneath their feet was dry and cracked, the brittle sagebrush whispering secrets of ancient rites as mists curled lazily through the glen. A sudden gust stirred the leaves, carrying the scent of dust and distant thunder. From the haze emerged a lean figure, an old shaman cloaked in tattered robes, his eyes burning with a pale, unwavering fire. Time had carved lines deep on his face, but his gaze was steady, knowing. "You seek what many dread." The shaman's voice came, soft yet cutting through the quiet. The truth behind the veil. The path of purity is never a shield from fear, but a mirror within it. To accept my gift is to face your own shadow. Will you walk this road, Yiska, when all that you have known trembles beneath your feet? Yiska swallowed thickly, his breath hitching as the weight of years pressed down against his chest. The warrior, whose hands had carved survival from harsh lands, now teetered at the edge of a profound unknown. With slow certainty, his eyes locked on the artifact the shaman extended. A slender pendant carved from bone, pristine and stark amid the time-worn air. Pulsing faintly, it carried the silent promise of redemption and the unspoken burden of sacrifice. Nayeli stepped forward without hesitation. "This is more than a token," she said quietly, voice steady and clear. "To hold it is to confront what we hide even from ourselves. Purity does not shatter the spirit. It binds the broken fragments together." Memories surged unbidden, faces lost to merciless raids, the heavy, acrid scent of smoke drifting over scorched earth, bloodied hands that bore the scars of survival. Could Yiska abandon the armor forged in countless battles for this haunting ideal? His heart thundered with unsettled fear. Before he could answer, the calm shattered. Twigs snapped under heavy, hurried footsteps. Rough, angry voices tore through the serenity like jagged knives. Out of the cover of cedars charged a band of fanatics, their battle cries echoing across the mesas like rolling thunder. Their eyes burned with fury, a mix of zealotry and vengeance. Among them moved a ghost from Yiska's past, an old comrade twisted by bitterness. "Traitor!" the man spat, his voice thick with hate. "You poisoned these lands with your bleeding heart, and that woman's false hope. We'll snuff out your weakness." Dust exploded into the air as steel clashed violently. Yiska's body responded with practiced precision, carving deadly arcs between friend and foe. But a discord grew within. His blade was swift, but his spirit fractured. Nayeli fought fiercely beside him, her movements fluid yet vigilant, guarding the emblem that pulsed like a fragile heartbeat in her grasp. Former allies pressed in savagely, faces twisted with scorn and fanatic devotion to brutal survival. To them, Yiska's pursuit of purity was betrayal, a soft surrender, a poison spreading through hardened souls. The storm of violence was ruthless and unrelenting. Then, suddenly, cold iron bit into Yiska's wrists. Shackled and betrayed, he was dragged screaming through thorned brush and jagged rocks, the clatter of chains slicing through the chaos like sharpened agony. Bound not only in flesh, but haunted by expectation and shattered trust, his body ached. But deeper still was the torment gnawing at his soul. In the shadowed confines of captivity, specters returned, the screams of the massacre he had barely survived, faces frozen in pain beneath a dying sun. The purity he feared, seemingly a cruel phantom, both promise and peril intertwined. Nayeli was gone, taken beyond reach, her fate a hollow ache in the void. Suddenly, a shadow stirred within his bleak cell. A weathered figure from days past appeared, scarred but fierce in resolve. Without a word, the man revealed a hidden blade and whispered, "You're not finished. Come, face your fear, reclaim what was lost." Wounded but unbroken, Yiska pushed himself upright. Each breath was prayer and promise, each step a defiance against the gathering darkness. The way ahead was jagged and unsure, laced with threats sharp as cactus spines. Yet faint flames of hope sputtered stubbornly in his heart. Outside, distant hooves beat a relentless rhythm. The fanatics' cavalry, swollen in number and fueled by rage, thundered closer. Yiska's grip tightened, muscles coiling with tension. The battle was no longer only for survival. It was a war for spirit, for the fragile flame of purity that could transform all. As the enemy surged over the dusty ridge beneath dawn's bruised light, Yiska stepped forward, resolute and unyielding. The true trial, the struggle between fear and hope, between past scars and future. Redemption was about to begin. The morning sun filtered through the ancient cedars, casting long, wavering shadows that clung to the restless earth like spiderwebs. Yiska stood among the few warriors gathered beneath the towering sentinels, his gaze fixed toward the rugged terrain ahead, the territory sacred. It's a land whispered about in legend, where spirits spoke in winds and truths bled from the very stones. Here, answers waited, if one dared ask the wrong questions. The air was sharp, dry, and pierced by uncertainty as Yiska's fingers clenched the haft of his knife, the coarse leather biting into his palm. The emblem that Nayeli guarded gleamed faintly under the filtered light, pure and untarnished, a fragile flame threatening to ignite old fears buried beneath layers of blood and sorrow. Each step forward pulled at the threads of Yiska's soul, the dread of what purity might demand coiling tighter in his chest than any war cry ever had. The territory sacred welcomed them with a heavy silence, cracked only by the whisper of dry leaves and distant, unseen, watchful eyes. Nayeli's steady presence beside him was a pale mountain against the storm raging within. As they pushed through a narrow glen, morning mists curled and clung to cracked earth. From the shifting veil stepped a figure, an old shaman, his robes ragged but his eyes aflame with cold fire. His gaze bored into Yiska, unraveling the warrior's defenses with the weight of centuries. "You seek what many fear," the shaman intoned, voice as fragile and penetrating as cracked sagebrush. "Purity is no shield from fear. It mirrors it. To accept what I bear is to face the shadows you have long denied. Will you walk this path willingly?" Yiska's breath faltered. The bloodied hands that had once carved paths through enemies now trembled before a journey forged not in steel, but in spirit. The shaman extended a pendant, carved bone shining stark and unblemished, a symbol of redemption and sacrifice. Nayeli stepped forward, voice calm but unwavering. "To carry this is courage, Yiska. It demands facing the parts of ourselves we hide the longest. Purity binds the broken instead of shattering them." A storm of memories crashed through him. Faces lost in fire, screams swallowed by desert wind, the bitter taste of survival, worn like a jagged scar. Could he lay down his armor forged in relentless war for this fragile, unsettling hope? Before an answer could take shape, the forest erupted. Rough footsteps shattered the stillness, voices rasping with fury and venom. From the cedars burst a band of fanatics, their battle cries cleaving the air like thunderclaps. Eyes wild with zeal, faces marred by the grime of old hatred and vengeance. Among them moved a ghost from Yiska's past. Once a brother in arms, now twisted by betrayal. His voice spat venom as he thundered, "Traitor! You soil the land with your bleeding heart and that woman's poison. We will snuff out weakness." Dust exploded into a chaotic dance as steel rang against steel. Yiska moved with the weeful grace of countless battles, but within, the battle waged fiercer, a war between old instincts and burgeoning doubt. Nayeli fought fiercely beside him, guarding the emblem as if it held the breath of their future. His former comrades pressed hard, faces twisted with bitter scorn and fanatic resolve. To them, Yiska's reach for purity was treason, a soft surrender that threatened to unravel all they had built in bloody nights. Suddenly, the cold bite of iron locked around his wrists. Shackled and overwhelmed, Yiska was dragged through thorn-laced brush and over jagged rocks, chains clattering, a cruel metronome echoing broken trust and shattered hopes. His body ached, but the torment gnawed deeper, the fracture between the warrior he was and the man he was becoming. In the dim shadows of captivity, ghostly faces and screams haunted his mind. The purity he feared flickered like a cruel phantom, promise twisted with peril. Nayeli vanished beyond reach, her fate a hollow ache beneath crushing silence. Then, from the gloom emerged a figure, a familiar silhouette marked by scars and resolve. No words spoke his arrival, only the glint of a hidden blade and a whispered breath. "You are not done. Come, face what you fear, reclaim what was lost." Bloodied, battered, but unbowed, Yiska rose, Every movement carried the weight of pain and a spark of stubborn hope. The path was jagged, veined with peril, yet the ember of renewal flickered stubbornly within his chest. Outside, the relentless drumbeat of hooves echoed over barren hills. The fanatics' cavalry surged, swollen in fury and number, their war cries a dark promise riding the dawn. Yiska's grip tightened around his blade as muscles coiled beneath sun-parched skin. This was no mere fight for survival. It was a war for spirit, for the fragile flame of purity that might yet forge a future unbroken by blood. As the enemy charged over the crest in a surge of dust and shadow, Yiska stepped forward, the light of the rising sun revealing the fight etched into his soul. The true trial, the crucible where fear wrestled hope, where past scars met the promise of redemption, was about to begin. The scorching sun rose steadily over a divided land, its brutal light exposing the fractures within the tribe as vividly as it baked the earth beneath their feet. The territory sacred lay heavy before them, the place where spirit and flesh were tested alike. Beneath ancient cedars that stretched like watchful sentinels, Yiska gathered the scattered remnants of his people. The air hung thick with tension, the weight of unspoken questions pressing down on every face. A war not of bullets or arrows, but of hearts and beliefs, raged quietly. Inside Yiska, the battle waged between the hardened warrior he had always been and the fragile possibility Nayeli had introduced, a purity that threatened to rend the world he knew asunder. Around him, those who still clung to the raw ferocity of survival eyed the emblem she bore with suspicion sharp enough to cut deeper than any blade. Yiska's fingers circled the worn haft of his knife, knuckles pale from the grip. The emblem gleamed softly against Nayeli's chest, a beacon that some saw as hope, others as blasphemy. Whispers curled like smoke through the gathered crowd. The tribal lines frayed further, their war cries now replaced with murmurs, accusations, divided loyalties. The old code of brutal endurance clashed violently with the new dawn of idealism. Nayeli stepped forward, her voice the fragile voice of reason in a storm of doubt. She spoke not with the eagerness of a proselytizer, but the calm conviction of one bearing a truth learned in hardship. Her words wove through the crowd, reaching some hearts, stirring others into fearful silence. The purity we seek is not weakness. It is the strength that can bind us beyond war. But the hardened eyes watching her were shadowed by suspicion and fear. As the day deepened, the balance shattered. Rough hoofbeats tore through the stillness, the air rent by savage cries that set blood to racing and muscles to taut readiness. Out of the western ridge charged a fierce band of fanatics, their war paint smeared and weapons thirsting for carnage. Their leader, a brutal man carved from the very harshness of the land, roared a warning that cut through the fragile hope like a jagged knife. The time for softness is done. Purity feeds only the dead. Yiska moved swiftly, commanding the warriors who still believed in a new way, urging order as the enemy surged forward like a wildfire through dry brush. The clash was immediate, chaos spilling in blood and dust. Steel hammered against steel. Cries of defiance met angry shouts. The old world and the new collided with the force of a thunderclap. Amid the tumult, Yiska found himself face to face with the scarred leader. The man's eyes burned with bitter conviction, lips curled in a sneer as he spat venom into the warrior's soul. "Abandon your illusions, Yiska, the brutal. Survive. Your purity is a dagger aimed at your own heart." The words struck deep, dredging memories of long nights, shrouded in fire and loss. The screams of kin swallowed by silence, the bitter rage carved into his hands and spirit. Yet, within that well of old pain flickered a fragile ember, a light faint but unwavering. Yiska did not raise his blade in blind fury. Instead, he fought with a new purpose, a conviction that coursed through his veins despite the ache in his chest. His strikes were swift and true, but carried more than mere wrath. They bore the hope Nayeli had planted, the belief that strength could be born from purity, not destruction alone. Slowly, the tide turned. Warriors rallied behind him, their fierce eyes reflecting a troubled hope. The battle flowed like a storm, violent, unrelenting, but edged with something unfamiliar, the promise of change. When the final echoes faded and the bruised sun dipped low, the tribe gathered amid broken arrows and smoldering earth. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by Nayeli's trembling voice as she stepped forward. "There is a secret to this purity, one I must tell you now before the dawn of new days." Yiska's gaze locked onto hers, taut with tension, struggling between the promise and the weight of dread. "Tell me," he said, voice low but firm. "If we are to walk this path, I need to know all." Her eyes faltered for the briefest heartbeat, then steadied like the calm after a devastating storm. Purity is not without cost. To protect it, to truly live it, you must sacrifice more than the battles you have won, more than lands or lives. You will have to bear a part of yourself you have long hidden, perhaps even feared. The words settled over the tribe like a chilling wind. Hearts pounded in anxious rhythm, breaths held in silent communion with the weight of the unknown. Beyond the ridge, shadows moved once more. The rival band, bloodied but unbroken, rallied beneath the first timid rays of dawn. Their war cries rose anew, fierce and unyielding, heralding that the coming storm would tear through soul as much as flesh. Yiska tightened his grip upon the weapon worn at his side, eyes dark and resolute. The choice had come to the blaze of steel and spirit, to fall back into the savage comfort of brutality, or step forward into the vulnerable light of purity. The battle to come would ask more than strength. It would demand the very essence of his being. With his people at his back and Nayeli's unyielding gaze beside him, he stepped into the rising sun, the war for their souls and for the fragile flame of a purer future, about to ignite anew. The rising sun burned away the dark veil of night, casting long shadows across the battered land where Yiska stood once more, his eyes sharp with a renewed and unyielding resolve. Around him, the few warriors who had chosen a new path gathered beneath the towering cedars, their breath steady despite the scarred earth beneath their feet. The territory sacred awaited, a place where spirit and flesh would face their ultimate test. The war cries of fanatics had faded into distant echoes, but the battle within their hearts raged fiercer than ever. Yiska's fingers curled tightly around the haft of his knife, knuckles white as he steadied himself. Nayeli stood at his side, the emblem she carried glowing softly against the dawn's light, a fragile flame balanced between hope and sacrifice. The air was thick with tension, the fracture within the tribe palpable, yet slowly knitting together beneath his unwavering gaze. The scarred leader of the rival band emerged from the thinning dust of battle, backed by the last loyal zealots clinging to cruel old ways. His eyes burned with raw, bitter fury, a man certain that only relentless force would endure. Yet when his gaze met Yiska's, something unspoken passed between them. The warrior no longer carried the same shadow of doubt. He was different now, transformed by hardship, by the burden of fear faced and rejected. "Abandon your illusions, Yiska," the leader spat, voice harsh as a rattlesnake's strike. "Only the brutal survive. Your purity is a dagger aimed at your own heart. You will see it soon." A hollow roar rose from the gathered warriors, both friend and foe, the moment hanging like brittle glass. But Yiska's steps were slow, deliberate, infused with a strength beyond muscle and blade. The purity Nayeli had taught him, the courage to face his own brokenness, had forged a new kind of power. He did not raise his knife to plunge it with blind fury. Instead, he spoke, voice steady and low. "Purity is not a weakness. It is the seed from which healing grows." His words rippled through the tense silence, dissolving decades of fear and suspicion in their fragile truth. Steel clashed as the battle erupted anew, but Yiska's strikes were guided not just by survival instinct, but by a fierce hope, a belief that their conflict need not end in death alone. Around him, warriors wavered, then rallied, their hearts shifting as if awakening from long slumber. The clash was savage, but carried a new rhythm, one of unspoken promise and fragile reconciliation. The tide turned, slowly but irreversibly. When the final cry faded into the heavy stillness, the tribe gathered amid the broken earth, eyes searching and breath catching in shared relief. Nayeli stepped forward, her voice trembling with the weight of truth. "There is a secret behind this purity," she said gently, meeting Yiska's gaze with quiet resolve. To protect it, to truly embrace it, one must accept a sacrifice deeper than any battle, won or lost. Yiska's breath hitched. Every scar, every loss trembled in his heart like a haunting echo. And now the final truth awaited. "Tell me," he demanded quietly, "if this path leads to light, I must also face the shadows it demands." Her eyes glistened, but did not waver. "The purity we seek is not without cost. It asks that you lay bare a part of yourself long hidden. The pride, the pain, the hardened core you have built walls around. To surrender these is to open the door to healing, but it does not come without loss." The gathered tribe stood silent, the words settling like dust on cracked earth. The hope that shimmered in Nayeli's emblem now intertwined with the gravity of sacrifice. Yiska's heart ached, but within it a strange peace took root. He knew now that the warrior who feared purity had become a man ready to embrace it. Beyond the ridge, the sun climbed higher as the rival band, battered and beaten, retreated into the wilderness. Their war cries faded, replaced by the quiet hum of a land breathing with cautious hope. Yiska looked out over the horizon, the wind tugging gently at his hair and the dust beneath his boots. Nayeli stepped close, her hand finding his, warm and steady. Together, they faced a future forged not in the brutality of endless battle, but in the fragile strength of unbroken spirit and shared understanding. Though the scars of the past would never fully fade, the tribe stood united as one, ready to rebuild from the ashes, guided by a new light. Yiska's soul, once bound by fear and war, now carried a heavy grace, a testament to the journey he had endured and the purity he had come to know, not as a curse, but as a promise. The sun rose fully, illuminating the vast expanse of the frontier. And with that light, Yiska stepped forward into the dawn, no longer a warrior haunted by dread, but a guardian of hope, a beacon for his people, and a witness to the fragile, enduring power of redemption. The saga was complete. The land was still harsh and wild, but for the first time in long memory, it sang a song of peace born from courage and sacrifice. This was their new beginning.